Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Rochelle believed Thanksgiving was a kind of magic, one you had to make yourself year after year. Planning started weeks before the holiday. It was not just about food, but memory, reputation, and respect. She took inventory of her pantry and her relationships. She made lists in a spiral-bound notebook that always sat by her bed. She thought about what her cousins liked best. LaToya was always asking for extra cornbread dressing, heavy on sage and onion. Her brother Darnell swore nobody made baked macaroni and cheese like she did, thick and golden with a 4-cheese blend. Her Aunt Velma would pick through every sweet potato pie until she found the one with the flakiest crust. And her father wanted nothing more than oxtails slow-cooked with butter beans swimming in gravy. Calvin, her husband, had surprised her this year. He was more supportive than she had seen him in a long time. He seemed genuinely excited about the holiday. He pushed everything forward, offered to help with the menu, and made calls to check on family for her. Some evenings he came home with his arms full of new groceries and small surprises, fresh flowers, a new apron for Rochelle, boxes of chocolates. And 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, he came home carrying 3 beautifully wrapped packages and placed them in Rochelle's hands, his eyes bright, his voice gentle. Rochelle's belly filled with butterflies. For the first time in ages, it felt like they were a real team. This was shaping up to be their most beautiful, well-planned Thanksgiving yet. The notebook held everything: ingredients, reminders, names. Beyond the food, Rochelle and Calvin talked about gifts for their parents. It had become a tradition since they had gotten married. Each Thanksgiving, they surprised both sets of parents with something thoughtful. Sometimes it was something simple but meaningful, like framed family photos. Sometimes it was something big, like a prepaid cruise or a weekend getaway. This year, Rochelle insisted they pick out luxury spa packages for both mothers. And for the fathers, a set of custom engraved tumblers and a basket of fine bourbons. Calvin was so enthusiastic, researching gift options late at night, making sure they got everything just right. Even when things had grown cold between them in the past, Rochelle refused to let the holidays grow cold, too. But this year, Calvin's warmth filled the house right alongside hers. She ordered everything online, tracked the packages, and wrapped each item herself with gold ribbon and handwritten notes. She left the gifts in a neat pile in the living room where sunlight pooled in the afternoon. She wanted the house to feel warm before anyone ever walked through the door. With Calvin so attentive, helping her with bows, teasing her lightly about her perfectionism, she felt lighter than she had in years. Calvin's contributions were everywhere this year. He showed up to the family planning meetings, laughing and sharing stories, making sure the playlist was balanced with classics and favorites, double-checking the seating chart. If he noticed the effort Rochelle put into every detail, he showed it, squeezing her shoulder, telling her he could not wait for everyone to see what they had done together. Sometimes she wondered if he remembered what the holidays used to mean before money and pride crowded out everything else. But seeing him this November, it felt like he had found his way back to her. Rochelle did not complain. She made phone calls, arranged for extra seating, texted reminders to her cousin Eric, who was always late, and even arranged a ride for her great-aunt Margie, who did not drive at night. Calvin helped every step, reminding her, double-checking, and even loading extra folding chairs in the trunk himself. Her friend Patrice came by the night before Thanksgiving, her hands full of lilies and wine, her eyes taking in Rochelle's busy kitchen with a knowing look. "You do not need help. You need a vacation," she joked, but the affection in her voice made it light. Rochelle laughed, rolling biscuit dough, heart heavy and buoyant at the same time, glancing over at Calvin, who was humming along to the music and chopping green onions just the way she liked. The day before Thanksgiving, Rochelle woke at sunrise and started the first round of preparation. She simmered collard greens with smoked turkey wings, roasted sweet potatoes for pie, and brined a turkey breast with fresh herbs and citrus. Calvin was up right behind her, offering to dice onions, fetch groceries, and even taste-test the gravy. The house filled with the promise of comfort, and Rochelle hummed softly as she worked, sometimes pausing to jot a quick note in her ever-present notebook, sometimes standing in the doorway just to look at Calvin when he did not notice her. It was a small luxury to witness his good mood stretching into the details of a family day they both said they wanted. She set the table with her mother's old china, each plate rimmed with gold, each fork polished until it gleamed. She made sure every chair was sturdy and every glass clean, setting out extra napkins embroidered with leaves. Calvin insisted on adding a centerpiece. He bought fresh mums and arranged them himself, a little clumsy but sweet. The guest list was long, and Rochelle would not have it any other way. Thanksgiving morning was bright and crisp. The Atlanta air was cool enough to make you grateful for a warm kitchen. Rochelle was up before the sun, rolling out pie crust, basting turkey, checking every dish twice. She dressed in a simple silk house dress, hair swept back, skin glowing from the oven's heat. She glanced at her notebook, checked off the last items, and placed the stack of gifts in the living room where everyone would see them when they arrived. Calvin came in with fresh coffee for them both and a bouquet of Rochelle's favorite flowers, handing them to her with a shy smile. He was cheerful, telling her how proud he was, how beautiful she looked. Rochelle's belly fluttered with happiness. If someone had told her a month ago that Calvin would make her feel so cherished, she would have laughed. Now it felt real. She set the banana pudding in the refrigerator and focused on what mattered. Her family was coming. By noon, the doorbell was ringing constantly. Her brother Darnell was first, arms full of homemade pickles and jokes about Rochelle's meticulous nature. He hugged her hard, sniffed the air, and declared, "It smells like heaven in here." Rochelle rolled her eyes but hugged him back, feeling the first real spark of holiday joy. Calvin greeted Darnell with a warm grin, offered to take his coat, and made sure he had a drink. Aunt Velma shuffled in next, purse heavy with hard candy and opinions. She kissed Rochelle on both cheeks, immediately asked to see the pies, and offered unsolicited advice about gravy. Rochelle listened, grinned, and waved her aunt toward the living room where the gifts gleamed under soft lamplight. Calvin laughed with Velma, guided her to a seat, and made sure she was comfortable. Rochelle's mother arrived with Rochelle's father, both looking proud and a little tired. They carried a sweet potato pie, store-bought, but nobody said a word, a bottle of wine, and quiet memories of holidays past. Rochelle pressed their gifts into their hands, watching their faces brighten with surprise and gratitude. Calvin's parents came in not long after, dressed in their Sunday best, and Calvin stepped forward with practiced warmth, careful to make everyone feel at home. The house filled quickly. LaToya and her children burst in, the children shrieking and chasing each other through the hall. Eric arrived late as usual, blaming traffic and bringing his famous coconut cake. Patrice showed up with lilies for every room. Darnell's wife carried a tray of roasted Brussels sprouts and stories about her students. Even Great Aunt Margie made it, helped up the steps by 2 grandchildren, wrapped in a wool shawl and radiating love. Rochelle hugged every single one of them, handed out plates and drinks, and steered everyone toward laughter and warmth. Each person admired the gifts in the living room. Her mother's spa certificate made her tear up, and Calvin's father laughed aloud at the personalized bourbon tumblers. The children squealed over little gift bags Rochelle had made just for them, each one containing puzzles, candy, and books. Calvin was in the middle of it all, pouring drinks, pulling out chairs, and grinning at Rochelle as if he were seeing her for the first time. By mid-afternoon, the house was packed and alive, every surface covered with food, every chair filled. Music played low, old Motown records spinning on the turntable Calvin had given Rochelle during their 3rd Christmas together. She remembered how he used to dance with her in the kitchen, how he would tell her she was the only music he needed. The memory flickered, and seeing Calvin laughing and passing plates, it almost felt like the old days had come back. Rochelle carried out platter after platter, dressing, greens, turkey legs, oxtails, macaroni, and cheese. Her family cheered her on, filling plates, passing bowls, and arguing over whose potato salad recipe reigned supreme. Calvin led a toast to Rochelle, everyone clapping, Rochelle blushing. For a few hours, everything felt right. Every bite tasted like home. Calvin's phone buzzed on the countertop, and he answered in the hallway, voice low and urgent. Rochelle heard him, but pretended not to. She focused on her guests, keeping everyone happy, making sure no one felt left out. She made a plate for Great Aunt Margie, brought her an extra cushion, and poured sweet tea for her mother. She checked in on her niece and her niece's friends, smiling at their stories and snapping photos for the family group chat. As the sun set and candles glowed on the table, Rochelle felt a sense of peace, fragile but real. She poured herself a glass of wine and prepared to let the evening unfold. Dinner began with a toast. Rochelle stood at the head of the table, raising her glass to the family, to love, to making it through another year. Calvin stood beside her, one hand in his pocket, his smile a little tight. Everyone echoed her words. Laughter and gratitude filled the room. They ate, they laughed, they passed food and memories. It was the kind of Thanksgiving that made you believe in family again, even if only for a night. Just as the debate about cornbread versus dinner rolls started to warm up, the front door opened without a knock. Brianna walked in as if she belonged there, as if she had always belonged. She was light-skinned, her hair pressed and perfect, lipstick bold, her belly round and obvious beneath a designer dress. Her heels clicked on the hardwood, each step a punctuation mark. The room went silent. The air shifted in a blink, dense with shock. Calvin smiled. It was not a smile of shame or regret, but something smug, cruel, almost triumphant. He did not shrink. He stood up, chest lifted, and walked to Brianna's side, taking her hand, their fingers interlocking with practiced ease. He wanted everyone to see. Brianna paused, eyes cool and assessing, lips curved in a half-smirk. She surveyed the table, her gaze lingering on Rochelle a second longer than necessary, then rested her manicured hand on her stomach. Calvin squeezed her hand, proud, sure of himself. "Since everyone is here, I might as well say it," Brianna announced with a crisp clarity. "Calvin and I are having a baby, and he promised me we would build a life together, starting with him leaving this marriage." Latoya gasped. Aunt Velma clutched her pearls. Darnell muttered, "This is unbelievable." Rochelle's mother whispered, "Lord, have mercy." But Rochelle did not move. She did not flinch. She blinked slowly, her eyes steady on Brianna and Calvin, her hands resting on the table, calm. Calvin smiled, but Rochelle raised one hand. "Not now." The silence that followed was electric, as if the whole house was holding its breath. Calvin looked around, waiting for someone to defend him or lash out at Rochelle. Brianna looked pleased, waiting for Rochelle to break, to cry, to prove herself weak. Rochelle did not oblige. She stood up, slow and deliberate, smoothing her dress. She walked to the sideboard, pulled out a worn folder, and returned to the table. Her movements were calm, measured, full of certainty. She laid the folder down between the mashed potatoes and the gravy boat and looked first at Brianna, then at Calvin. "I was hoping to wait until dessert," Rochelle said, her voice even and strong. "But since you wanted a moment, Brianna, let me give you one." She opened the folder and slid out a stack of papers. Legal filings, notarized documents, signatures, board approvals, company papers. Rochelle held them up so everyone could see the truth gleaming under the chandelier. "Calvin does not own the company anymore. He has not for 2 years. I do. Full control. I bought him out quietly while he was busy playing chief executive officer and getting his ego stroked." Brianna's confident posture cracked. Her mouth parted in confusion, her eyebrows drawing together. Calvin's hands slipped from Brianna's, his face draining of color, his confidence leaking away. Rochelle turned to face Calvin, her gaze unflinching. Every relative at the table was silent, watching, some with open mouths, others with barely contained shock. The reality was plain. Calvin had been playing at power, but he had lost the game before he even knew it had begun. She turned her attention to Brianna, her voice still measured, almost gentle. "And you are not just pregnant with a liar's child. You are also without a job because as of this morning, I fired Calvin. The board approved it. His severance package does not include benefits for mistresses or side children." A ripple moved through the room, chairs creaking, utensils dropping, someone exhaling loudly. Brianna stared, words failing her for the first time that evening. Calvin looked as if the floor might swallow him whole. Even the children, sensing the seriousness, went quiet. Rochelle did not need to say anything else. The moment belonged to her. The house she had filled with food, gifts, and love was also filled with her power, her choices, her strength. She walked back to her seat, poured herself a glass of wine, and let the smile she had hidden all day finally break across her face. She looked around at her family, each one staring back at her, admiration shining in their eyes. "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone." It took a few seconds for sound to return to the room. Patrice, who had been sitting near the end of the table, cleared her throat lightly and took hold of Great Aunt Margie's hand. Darnell stood, not in a rush, but with the satisfaction of someone who had watched a storm pass without flinching, and he gently asked Rochelle's mother if she needed water. Latoya covered her mouth, then lowered her hand and blinked steadily, her expression sharpening from shock into relief. Eric, at last, slid the coconut cake farther onto the sideboard, as if to say dessert could wait for dignity to re-enter the room. Brianna released a small, brittle laugh that did not reach her eyes. She glanced at Calvin, seeking confirmation, but found none. The confidence that had carried her across the threshold faltered. "This is not over," she said, but the sentence had no weight to it. She adjusted the strap of her purse and took a breath measured enough to be heard. For a moment, Rochelle almost felt pity, a clean, brief flicker, before it faded. Choices had been made. Consequences had arrived right on time. Calvin looked at Rochelle, then at the papers, then at the faces that had been laughing with him an hour ago. The truth had a way of drawing straight lines through a room. He had always underestimated Rochelle's composure, had mistaken warmth for weakness, collaboration for concession. Now, with the evidence in black and white and the board's signature stamps shining in the candlelight, he seemed to understand the shape of what he had lost. He opened his mouth, closed it, and turned toward Brianna as if stepping onto a raft already coming apart. Rochelle did not raise her voice, and she did not gloat. She lifted her glass as if to reset the evening and said, "Please eat. The food is hot." It was a simple sentence, not sharp, not cruel. It carried the calm conviction of a woman who had already done the hardest part of the work. Aunt Velma, who had never met a tense silence she did not try to soften, nodded vigorously and reached for the bowl of greens. Darnell took the platter of turkey legs and passed it to Rochelle's father, who carved with a focus that felt like respect. Patrice leaned in to ask Great Aunt Margie whether she wanted more sweet tea. Conversation resumed in careful stitches. A child laughed in the hallway, relief breaking the surface like fresh air after a long dive. Brianna stepped backward, her heels tapping a metronome of retreat. She looked around as if expecting a door to open that would lead her to a different version of the night. There was no such door. Calvin followed her toward the entryway, his posture narrower than it had been, his certainty hollowed out. He paused at the threshold, perhaps waiting for Rochelle to call him back, perhaps remembering the years they had built together, the holidays, the small mornings when coffee steam met sunlight on their kitchen counter. Rochelle did not speak. She took another sip of wine. The front door closed behind them with the quiet click of a decision finalized. For a beat, the room listened to the absence, then breathed in again. Rochelle set down her glass and steadied the center of the table with her eyes, taking in each face like a roll call of gratitude. "We will cut the pies in 20 minutes, she said, evenly, and a few people smiled, grateful for the return of ordinary markers. LaToya's children emerged from the hallway, their curiosity spent, their attention drawn back to the buffet by the glow of candied yams and the promise of macaroni. Rochelle's mother stood and embraced her daughter from behind, a silent circle of arms around the woman who had held the day together. "I am proud of you," she murmured. "I know," Rochelle said softly. It was not pride she wore, though. It was order. It was self-respect made visible. Darnell, who had always been more protective than he liked to admit, leaned close as he passed Rochelle a basket of rolls. "You did right," he said. It was not a question. Rochelle nodded. She did not need validation, but she received it as one receives a hand on the back crossing a street. Not necessary, but kind. Eric, trying for normalcy, asked who had brought the Brussels sprouts, and Darnell's wife launched into a brief description of the recipe, the oven temperature, the moment the balsamic turns glossy. The table responded, grateful for culinary conversation, for familiar rhythms that could carry them toward the safety of dessert. Rochelle moved through the room with measured ease, checking refills, answering questions, adjusting a napkin, shoring up a tray. The work steadied her, not because she needed distraction, but because action was the language she preferred. She had already done the work of rearranging her life. Now she did the work of preserving a holiday, and they were, in their separate ways, the same labor. She found her father's eyes across the table and held them for a heartbeat. He had always admired her discipline. He lifted his glass slightly in a quiet salute and returned to his conversation with Great Aunt Margie about her shawl and whether the wool was too warm for the room. The Motown record finished its side and clicked into the soft hush of the needle. Calvin's absence felt like a door left open in winter, the draft noticeable but survivable. Patrice stood and flipped the record, and the first notes of a familiar song eased back into the house. Rochelle took a breath deep enough to feel, set down the serving spoon, and let her shoulders soften. She was not made brittle by the revelation. She was made clear. 20 minutes later, she cut the pies with the precision of a surgeon and the grace of a host who understands timing. Aunt Velma inspected the crust as if it held an algebraic proof, then gave an approving nod that made the cousins laugh. LaToya's children argued, in affectionate whispers, over which slice had the most cinnamon dusting. Rochelle's mother brought plates down the line, her steady hands a benediction on the evening. Dessert redistributed the light. It always did. Sugar carried a certain kind of mercy through a room. Darnell asked Rochelle if she wanted him to drive Great Aunt Margie home later. Rochelle thanked him and said she had already arranged a car. Eric confessed, with a sheepish smile, that he had forgotten to bring ice cream for the pie, and Patrice rescued him with a pint she had stashed in the freezer. Small forgettings. Small solutions. The house, which had absorbed a blow, showed its strength in the details. Conversations braided around the table. A teacher's story about a student who had surprised her with a thank-you note, a debate about whether citrus belonged in a brine, a memory of Rochelle's grandmother rolling out biscuits on a wooden board now hanging on Rochelle's kitchen wall. History did not vanish because someone tried to rewrite it. It hung on nails, it steamed from bowls, it sang from records, it lived in the way a family found its seats again. Rochelle gathered the legal documents and returned them to the folder, not to hide them, but to put them away the way you put away a serving dish. Used, necessary, done. She slid the folder back into the sideboard and closed the drawer with a quiet certainty that made everyone at the table relax by degree. There would be follow-up in offices and conference rooms. There would be signatures and handovers and emails threaded with formal language. That would come later. Tonight did not belong to litigation or corporate transitions. Tonight belonged to a woman who had organized her kitchen with the same care she had organized her future. When the youngest child grew sleepy, Rochelle walked him to the couch and tucked a throw blanket around his shoulders. She turned off the lamp by the window and let the living room sit in a gentler light. Through the doorway, she could see the neat stack of gifts, the gold ribbons still crisp, the envelopes tucked perfectly beneath the bows. She remembered the nights she had stayed up late ordering and wrapping. The way Calvin had leaned against the counter describing a new bourbon he had found. The way she had imagined this day unfolding. She did not regret that vision. She honored it by making the actual day beautiful anyway. As the evening thinned, people began to stand and stretch, to gather leftovers into containers, to press hugs into coats and scarves. LaToya kissed Rochelle on the cheek and promised to text when she reached home. Eric apologized again for being late and made everyone laugh by insisting his coconut cake's frosting could fix any problem. Aunt Velma took another slice of pie for the road, accepted a foil-wrapped plate of oxtails with a look of almost childlike delight, and reminded Rochelle to keep her head high, as if that were a task requiring a list and a timeline. Rochelle smiled and said she would. Patrice lingered behind, helping to sweep the kitchen floor and rinse the last of the plates. "Do you want me to stay a little while longer?" she asked, not out of pity, but out of friendship that had stood through seasons. Rochelle considered the question and looked around the room. The table was cleared. The record player's light glowed a small amber dot. The house smelled of cinnamon and rosemary and brown butter. "Thank you," Rochelle said. "I am all right." Patrice accepted the answer with trust, hugged Rochelle, and left, her perfume mixing with the lilies on the hallway table for one final, brief breath. When the door closed and the house settled into its own quiet, Rochelle washed the last glass and set it in the rack to dry. She wiped the counter until it shone, turned off the overhead light, and stood for a moment in the soft wash of the under-cabinet glow. The day had not been what she expected. It had been exactly what it needed to be. She walked to the living room, straightened the ribbon on one of the gifts, and sat. She did not rehearse speeches or tally grievances. She did not reach for her phone. She listened to the faint city hum and the occasional laughter of neighbors heading home from their own gatherings. She felt the shape of her life as it was now, a line drawn clearly, a table set fully, a door closed without slamming. Later, before bed, she opened her notebook and made 3 small check marks on the page dated for the holiday. Under food, she wrote, all served. Under family, she wrote, all seen. Under self, she wrote, all set. She did not always write to herself that way, but tonight it felt exact. She set the notebook by the lamp, turned off the light, and let the day slip into memory, not as a wound, but as a threshold crossed with steady feet. In the morning, there would be leftovers and logistics, calls from board members confirming transitions, perhaps a terse message from Calvin asking for a meeting to discuss the practicalities of leaving a job and eventually a marriage. There would be new boundaries to set, old accounts to reconcile, and long walks in the cold air to think without interruption. Rochelle would do those things with the same precision she had brought to brining a turkey breast and polishing her mother's gold-rimmed china. She would do them because she had already decided. The deciding had been the real work, and it was done. For now, the house rested. The centerpiece of Mum's Calvin had arranged, careful, clumsy, earnest, still stood in the middle of the table. Rochelle looked at it and decided to keep it watered until the last bloom folded in on itself. She appreciated what had been given and what had been taken away. She did not need to call it anything other than what it was. She stood, turned off the last light, and went to bed with the settled knowledge that a woman who can host with such care can rebuild with such care, that the same hands that plate pie can sign papers, and that there is a quiet power in doing both without raising your voice. In the days that followed, the family text thread swelled with photos from the night. Children midlaugh, a shot of Darnell crowning Rochelle, the queen of mac and cheese. A close-up of Aunt Velma pretending to measure crust flake with a ruler. Patrice holding lilies like a bouquet at a miniature wedding to dessert. No one posted a photo of the moment at the door. It did not need one. The story wrote itself in their eyes. Rochelle answered with a single image of the leftover plates stacked in neat rows, foil shining like small roofs in the refrigerator, with a caption that read only, "Take what you need." It was an invitation and, quietly, a philosophy. When Rochelle finally stepped out into the brisk afternoon a few days after Thanksgiving, she walked toward the small park 10 minutes from the house and sat on a bench under a leaf-bare tree. Atlanta's sky was wide and pale, a winter blue that promised a clean edge to every breath. She thought of the years that had brought her here, the early mornings building a business, the late nights solving problems no one would ever see, the small decisions that accumulate into a life. She thought of Calvin as he had been and as he had become, and she held both truths without asking them to argue. Then she stopped thinking and let the quiet do the work instead. There are evenings when a life rearranges itself with noise and spectacle, and there are evenings when a life rearranges itself with the soft click of a drawer closing on papers that have already decided the future. Rochelle's Thanksgiving had been both. She returned home to a house that still smelled faintly of nutmeg and thyme, opened the refrigerator, and smiled at the sight of the last slice of sweet potato pie. She placed it on a plate, sat at the kitchen counter, and ate it slowly, the fork tapping lightly against ceramic. It tasted like completion. It tasted like beginning. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.